Welcome to Your Vibrant Life podcast with me, Alison Stockton, the founder of Vibrant Balanced Health, health and wellness expert, and author of best-selling book, The Woman I Am Becoming. Thank you so much for joining on this podcast, where we will be sharing every week top tips, tricks, and inspiration of how you too can live your most vibrant life. Stepping into areas of personal development, self-love, self-appreciation, spirituality, and becoming the best version of yourself and living your most vibrant life. We're going to share with you steps and advice on health, spirituality, self-love, self-care, self-worth, and how to grow into the most incredible woman that you've always desired to be. This is a space for women to learn, to grow, and to live their healthiest, happiest life with women who are here ready to support you. We are so happy to welcome you here. And if you feel so called to, please do leave a comment at the end of the show to let us know that you've enjoyed it, share it with a friend or two, and inspire somebody today to live their best life and to learn to love the life that they live. We are so grateful for you being here, and we wish you the most incredible journey into living your most vibrant life. So guys, thank you for tuning in today. I am so excited to introduce to you my good friend and amazing therapist, Caroline Strawson. I'll share a little bit more about what she's a therapist in. She is a rapid transformational therapist, an EMDR practitioner, and she helps people in general, men and women, to self-heal after trauma of narcissistic abuse and upgrading their subconscious beliefs and releasing stuck trauma in the body. Caroline is a multi-award winning rapid transformational therapist and has recently trademarked her own amazing technique because she has so many different systems and it's all been pulled together. So Caroline, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us today. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure. So tell us about what exactly it is you do and this trademark that you have registered for the unique therapy that you help people with.
Well, I think it probably really all started with my own journey sort of 10 years ago, really, when I went through my own marriage breakdown. And when I came out of that marriage, I was in £70,000 worth of debt. I was diagnosed with PTSD, which I now know is complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, and
Can you just explain to the listeners who might not know what PTSD is?
So basically, there's a part of our brain which is called our limbic system. And this is our emotional part of the brain. And in that part of our brain, we have something called the hippocampus and the amygdala. Now, our amygdala is that fight, flight, fear center. And the hippocampus is where our memories are stored. Now, when we are involved in some kind of trauma. Now, I just also want to be clear to your listeners, because a lot of people think trauma is massive, massive trauma. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be that. It could be your parents divorced as a child. Yeah. It might be simple overwhelm with something. It's your perception of it. Mm-hmm. And it's over a period of time, certain symptoms, and then obviously means you get diagnosed with PTSD or complex PTSD.
And as well, you know, when you're speaking about like the soldiers being away at war or whatever that might be, it can also be triggered from an accident, a car accident or something simple. You know, it's prolonged, or it is something that's instant. Somebody who's had a surgery, even a cesarean, or, you know, an operation that was unexpected can trigger these traumas because your body, your hippocampus and the amygdala is not prepared for it because it's happened so suddenly.
And what happens then from a complex PTSD or PTSD perspective is our body hasn't finished processing the trauma and time-stamped it. So the hippocampus hasn't time-stamped that particular trauma that it is now in the past. So when you have these triggers in the present, which you are now safe in and you are okay now, because you've got this stored trauma in your body that hasn't finished processing, it takes you back just as if you were being right in that event again. So whether you go back to fight, flight or freeze. So for instance, say from a PTSD perspective, if a soldier had been in war and had seen his friend sadly get blown up, he might be in a car and someone closes the car door and it's a big bang. And that big bang would take him right back, if he'd got PTSD, to being in the moment where he saw that horrific traumatic event. And it's the same for, you know, the people I work with. They are trying to move on from a narcissistic relationship, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. But for me, I was still stuck in the past. So although I desperately wanted to heal once I came out of my marriage, every single time I had a trigger, because my body hadn't finished processing that trauma, it was stuck. It took me back predominantly to be in a freeze response. That was kind of, really in my marriage, it was freeze or fawn responses, my trauma responses. But when I was out of it, it was very much took me back to freeze responses all the time. Didn't want to see anybody, just hold up and everything as well.
So for our listeners who are wanting to understand a little bit more about that freeze response, is it that you kind of recoil and you go into your own shell and you don't want to be present in the world? What does that really mean?
So we have 4 trauma responses, which 3 definitely I'm sure your listeners will have heard of: fight, flight or freeze. But there is a 4th one called fawn as well, which is very prevalent in abusive relationships. So the fight is obviously self-explanatory. You know, you can be really, really angry. You know, you feel like you want to fight the world. The flight response is you just want to run away. You don't want to deal with anything. The freeze response is literally where you numb out. It's almost like you're having an out-of-body experience. And particularly with complex PTSD, this is really, really relevant. We have a lot what's called dissociation with that. It's almost like you're existing, but you're not really here, because your brain thinks, oh, this is the safest way for you to behave right now because you're in this traumatic event. Now, that doesn't mean, and I really want to stress this, because I think a lot of people who find themselves in freeze responses from the actual trauma itself and beyond the trauma, so when they're in the present, if they go into freeze response, so they, like you say, they recoil into themselves, they don't want to see anyone or speak to anyone, they might just want to watch TV all day even, they just want to numb out. A lot of people feel a lot of shame and guilt because of that. They beat themselves up. Why didn't I leave? Why didn't I run away? Why didn't I do this? And what we have to understand is that our brain's number one job is to keep us safe and survive. It's not to keep us happy or rich or successful. We've got to work at that, sadly, and be intentional. It's actually just to literally get you to survive in that second. So whenever you have found yourself in a freeze response, your brain has made a judgment in that moment with the amygdala. Your autonomic nervous system has then taken over and you have gone into a freeze response because your brain believes the safest thing for you to do in that moment is to freeze. Do nothing. Doesn't mean you are weak, and it doesn't mean you've given up. What it means is in that second, that's what you should do to stay safe. And as an analogy for this, if you imagine on the African plains, for instance, and you've got an antelope that's quite happily eating away at the grass, you know, the lion starts to come in and the antelope clocks the lion and immediately then goes into a response of flight. Starts to run away. So the lion is running after this antelope as the antelope is then in flight trauma response. You know, I need to move to survive to get out of this. Then the lion catches the antelope. So the antelope then thinks, oh my God, I need to fight now because otherwise I'm going to die. So the antelope starts to fight. It goes into the fight trauma response. And in that moment, as that lion is biting down onto that antelope, the antelope then goes into shutdown and thinks, I just need to freeze right now because I think I might die. It's the only thing. I'm just going to go into freeze response. And then it goes, almost acts like it's dead. But in that moment, the lion might stop and think, I've killed the antelope. I can eat it in a moment. And it stops and catches a breath. But in the moment as that lion stops and catches the breath, the antelope's not given up. It's just on the freeze response to, in that moment, think that's what I need to do. But the moment that lion steps back and thinks, I've killed this antelope now, I'm going to eat it in a moment, the antelope goes back into flight response and runs away. So for those people who look back and think they were in a freeze response and they're feeling guilty or angry at themselves, even, why didn't I leave? Why didn't I run away? Your body and brain in that moment thought it was the safest thing for you to do in that moment. It didn't mean you were giving up. It meant in that moment until it became safer for you to then move into something else or leave or fight or flight or whatever. So it's really important because I see a lot of my clients filled with this shame and guilt. You know, I'm so stupid. Why didn't I leave?
Yeah.
Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? No, you weren't. And in fact, it's embracing your body, thinking, wow, how amazing is my brain and body that it thought that was the best thing to do.
To protect itself.
Correct. And you know what? In that time and space, it probably was. But the key to stuck trauma is when we get out of that abusive relationship, we're now safe. We're not about to be eaten by the lion. We're not in that abusive relationship. Yes, we might have things that we have to deal with if we've got children and things like this, but a thought is just a thought. That's all. If we've got trauma that's trapped in our body, you might be thinking, you know, most of the time I'm going about my business and everything seems okay. But the moment you get a trigger, it takes you straight back to being in that trauma again, and then you're paralyzed again. Maybe you go into freeze mode and you can't do anything, which is obviously not good if you're running a business, if you have a job, if you have a family. You're in this constant state of fight, flight, or freeze all the time.
Especially if you've got children, I think that's really important, because from my own experiences, and I know you and I have spoken about this offline, it was kind of, for me, it was in a constant fight. It was a constant fight for too much of a lengthy period of time. And sometimes that trigger could be something that's been said by the children, from the ex-partner or whatever, that instantly takes you back into a fight, protection, and you almost try to defend yourself, and you actually just replaying that trauma, not only your own trauma, but that you then replay it to others.
You're absolutely right. And I think that in conjunction, there's twofold. So how I work with people, it's kind of that twofold approach. So I use a technique called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is all about bilateral stimulation. So this is about releasing that stuck trauma in the body. It's a somatic therapy, because trauma is a mind and body experience. It's not just a mind or thought. It's actually the body that we want to work on in trauma, because that's what's stopping us, that anxiety and, you know, shallow breathing and tense muscles, and that's what we need to work through. So we need to release that stuck trauma. But if we only release that stuck trauma and we have a faulty subconscious belief that was installed in our childhood, we're still going to carry on having certain triggers, because we're going to attach meaning to certain events based upon meaning we attached in our childhood. And this is when I use rapid transformational therapy, which is an incredible super therapy. It's not been around that long, maybe sort of 3 years now. And it's a combination of hypnotherapy, CBT, NLP, psychotherapy, and other modalities. And it's all about inner child healing, because our subconscious beliefs are formed in our childhood between the ages of 2 and 7. Now, again, many people might be listening and thinking, I had an amazing childhood. I'm sure that isn't the case. I thought I had an amazing childhood, and I'm not saying that I didn't. However, by nature of how my mother and father were towards me, I attached certain meaning to that came to me. I didn't feel good enough.
You're a high achiever, and this is something that happens. And I want to touch on this particularly because I work with a lot of women who are successful women who have varying careers, but they were always high achievers. Like you will share your story in a second, but always needed to be top of the class, always needed to go to the next level, always needed to get the degree or, you know, the masters or whatever, because they were always trying to fulfill somebody else's desires.
Correct. And certainly for me, up until probably 5 years ago, I would absolutely say that was me. Because again, my dad, I love him to bits. He is very emotionally unavailable. He's never ever said, I'm proud of you. He was never one to say, I love you. Now, of course, as an adult, I can see he was like that because of his own childhood. But as a child living with a father like that, who I was then captain of sports teams, a student, high achieving, got on well with everybody, did my homework, literally the idyllic child. And I never got, I'm proud of you. So as that child, not getting that recognition and praise, I thought, well, I can't be good enough then. I don't think as a 8-year-old child, oh, bless my dad. You know what? I know I'm good enough. It's just from his childhood that he doesn't know that, you know, and he's incapable of saying it. I didn't know that. I know it now that actually my dad was parenting to the best of his ability, but his capability to show me praise just wasn't on his agenda because he didn't know how to do that because no one did that with him.
Exactly. And from a child's perspective, you know, we seek external validation. You know, we want to say, mummy, look what I've done. Look at the drawing. Look at the work. Look what I've achieved. Da, da, da. And if you're not almost getting recognition from that, it's, for want of a better word, soul crushing.
It is. And
because you want to try harder.
Right. So I talk a lot with my clients about a hole in your soul. So I deal a lot with codependency issues with my clients. And codependency is a lack of self. So again, as a child, as we're born and we come into this world, it's down to our parents and caregivers to install in us a healthy sense of self, self-love, self-belief, self-esteem. And for whatever reason, whether it be major or minor, if they don't do that, we keep this hole in our soul. And then we're always trying to get other people to try and fill that for us. And one of the big things that I talk to my clients about from a parenting perspective is be careful when you are praising your children that you're not praising them for an end result. You know, so if a child gets, say, 10 out of 10 on a test, great, of course, that's fantastic. But don't just hone in on the 10 out of 10. You then also add in, do you know what? I'm so proud of you getting 10 out of 10. Because I know how hard you worked for that. So you're validating them. It's about themselves. It isn't about the result. Because if you don't do that, and my parents didn't do this, is it becomes conditional then. I must do this to get that. I must do this to feel that sense of worth or feel that love. And you go through your life then. And actually, again, for any of your listeners who are high achievers, the goalposts will always move. You will never achieve what it is you want to achieve to get that recognition because you are putting it in hands of people who are incapable of showing you anyway. You've got to stop looking externally for that. You have to go deep within, reparent yourself, heal that inner child. And that doesn't necessarily mean because you have bad parents, because your parents on average are all just doing the best that they can. It's just to their capabilities based on their own past experiences and their own childhood.
Yeah.
But we need to recognize we weren't born like that. You know, as a baby, if you're learning to walk and you get up and you fall back down, you just get back up again. You think, oh no, I'm not getting up again because I'm so unworthy and I can't do that. You just get up and do it. It's down to our parents and caregivers that then shape us. You know, it's like they install this subconscious program, which becomes the driver, the blueprint for who we are as an adult. So for me, RTT is phenomenal for this because it gets right to the root cause of, okay, it's not events in your childhood that cause you to have a faulty subconscious belief. It's the meaning and interpretation you attach to those events as that child that gave you that belief. Yeah. So we go back, look at those events, and then through the eyes of the adult that you now are, we say, well, okay, then, you know, should that be the meaning you attach to that event? And very often, of course, it isn't, because as a child, you would understand why you thought like that. But as an adult, you can say, hold on, I thought, for instance, from my perspective, me only getting 9.99 recurring off my dad as a judge when I was doing little gymnastics in the lounge, my meaning I attached as that 8-year-old little girl was, I'm not worthy of a 10. As the adult going back, I could think, my dad was being an idiot, not giving me a 10, but it was nothing to do with me not being good enough. Yeah. And they're two very different things. But once they're wired in, they're very hard to change.
I think that's important as well to, you know, we talk about parents and the way that our childhood was. It's not even necessarily sometimes our parents, because we could have the other spectrum where our parents are very praising and very, you know, overly compassionate about what we do as a children, but it could be we've been bullied by certain people through our childhood. And, you know, when we're at school, it could have been a teacher, it could have been something, because I know for me growing up as a child, I was, you know, there was always somebody had to pick on me. There was always somebody who found fault with me. So that came into my subconscious, not from my parents, but from others.
Absolutely. And then if we keep having, once we start to have a belief of not feeling good enough, any belief, in fact, that we get, our brain is scanning the world to reinforce it all of the time. So if you start to not feel good enough for a reason, every single thing then that happens is because you're not good enough. Because we need reasons for things. And as children, we need to understand, okay, this is happening for this reason. So we will always look to find these reasons for things. So once you start to get those subconscious beliefs, it will go into your teenage years and then your 20s and 30s and so on. So with RTT, because it's a form of hypnosis as well, I take you back into a theta brainwave state, which is where those initial subconscious beliefs were formed. And then we change it really deep at that subconscious level. And you get a personalized recording then, because the brain works on repetition. So we've had many years of feeling this belief. So the whole session is about 2.5 hours long. And we get right to the root cause of why you've got this subconscious belief through a journey of inner child healing, looking at what role this belief is playing for you. Because remember, you weren't born like this. It's there for a reason, and it's there because it wants to keep you safe and it wants to keep you away from the biggest perceived pain. But that was the perception of that child, not the adult that you are now. So it's just a really series of techniques. And for me, using RTT and EMDR together with other modalities I use cold therapy sometimes with my client as well, to move people from their emotional brain back online into their prefrontal cortex, reparenting techniques, positive psychology interventions. It's a whole host really of 10 years of solid research into this, of, academics and qualifications that I've got, because I believe it's what I went through. And for me, it works, and I just love helping other people with that.
And I think it's a big part of healing, isn't it? Because, you've now, because of all the modalities that you have got, being able to license it and call it neurofreedom healing is about all of these different, let's call it modalities that you can bring in to help people heal. Now, you work a lot with narcissistic abuse, recovering people from narcissistic abuse. Now, not that they've been the narcissist, but they've been exposed to that environment. So for our listeners, what does that actually mean? Some people kind of don't really understand what a narcissist is. And I know there's a very great thing that if you have to ask yourself you're a narcissist, then you're really not. Right. So to explain to the listeners about A, what a narcissistic person is, and B, what it is to be recovering from that.
So really, narcissist now in our society is a very overused term. If you split up from somebody and they're not very nice, everyone says, oh, my ex is a narcissist. And actually that really does do a disservice to those who have been the victims of narcissistic abuse. So we all have some narcissistic traits in us, or every single one of us does. But what a narcissist is in the true sense of this, it's a personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. It's listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the American Psychological Association, their manual of all things like depression, borderline personality disorder, all of the mental health disorders, and narcissistic personality disorder is listed in there. And it's listed in there with 9 different traits of a narcissist. And to be classified then as a narcissist, looking at this manual, you have to have at least 5 of these traits. So really what we can say is narcissistic personality disorder is on a spectrum, because in theory you can have someone who has 5 and you can also have someone who has all 9 of those too. Right. Now, the problem with narcissistic personality disorder and diagnosis, is it relies on obviously the person who is the narcissist to say, hey, I think I have a problem. I'm going to go and see a psychiatrist to get a diagnosis. Now, the problem with NPD is that a narcissist thinks it's everybody else's problem. They will never acknowledge. Very few. There's a couple of people that we see online that are self-confessed narcissists, and they will talk about that in a really interesting way, actually.
And some high profile of late.
Yeah.
Some high profile actors and actresses.
Yeah. But it's very much that for someone to recognize that they are a true narcissist, they won't ever admit to that. And therein lies the problem. And also the problem with a narcissist is they might act like the pillar of community. They are so nice in front of everybody else because they need to get that, what we call narcissistic supply from others. Oh my goodness, you're amazing. And there are also different types of narcissists. One of the most dangerous types that I think is the covert narcissist. So a lot of people think a narcissist is the archetypal walk into the room, everyone looks at them and they've got this air of grandiosity about them, almost like an arrogance as such. And yes, potentially that could be a narcissist. But the covert narcissist almost acts like a victim, almost acts like the poor me. And when someone acts like the poor me and you know inside that they've been abusing you, who do you tell? Because who's going to believe you? Who's going to believe you about this person who's meant to be so nice and the victim and the poor them? Why are they going to believe you? So one of the biggest things for listeners, I always think, rather than listing all 9 traits, so to speak.
Oh, I was just going to ask you that, so go ahead.
The main one really for me that really clears all of this up is a narcissist has zero empathy. None whatsoever. And I always say, and this is talking about it if you think you had, say, a narcissistic partner, if you were to sit in the middle of your lounge and say to your narcissistic partner, I think I've got cancer, for instance, okay? How would your narcissist react to you? Would they be quite stony-faced? Would they not be able to engage emotionally with you for that? Okay, so think about that. Then think about if you sat on your lounge floor with the narcissist and maybe other members of their family, your family, and you told them you'd got cancer, how would the narcissist react then? Because when they have an audience, they are very, very different, very different. And I certainly know with my ex-husband, I remember sitting on the lounge floor one time, is why I use this analogy, crying because I was so ill. And I'm somebody, if I'm ill, I've literally got to be on my deathbed before I say. And my ex-husband worked for an airline and we got children. And I was so poorly, I actually thought, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to look after the children whilst you were away. Never said it before. Very, very rarely did I ever say, I think you need to stay home, because I just always thought I'd get on with it. I would cope.
Manage.
But this particular time I thought, you know what? I feel so ill, literally. And he sat there, watched me with tears streaming down my face with not a single reaction. And it was almost like he was just watching paint dry, literally no emotion whatsoever. It's almost like I was having to beg as such to do that. There was no empathy. And again, that empathy is you can see somebody's hurt, and a difference between being an empath and being empathic. So an empath is you absorb that energy, but just having empathy means you can sympathize with that person, you get it. But there was nothing there, literally nothing there. So I always think that's one of the key things.
Was that one of the biggest eye-openers for you when you thought this needs to end?
No, not at the time, because it was normal for me for it just to feel, because when I look back, I think, no wonder I never asked him to help, because I probably knew that that's what the response would be. There's just no empathy there.
So you put yourself into the disassociation that you speak of earlier, because it's the norm.
Correct. I was very much probably at the start of my marriage, very much in fawn trauma response, pleasing him, trying to do the right thing all of the time, making excuses for his behaviour. Maybe it was down to me. That's the fawn response. We can look at trauma bonding with things like this. And then I would very much probably, goodness knows, maybe the last 3-4 years of our marriage, freeze response, just existing for my children, literally focused on being a mum. That was it. That was my life. And you know what? That I was prepared for it to be my life because I adored my children. And I just thought, you know what? I'll just exist. Let it get on with it. Carry on. I'll just be mum, because at the time I thought, oh no, keep my family together. I needed to keep them together. I
think that's a misconception that many do have, is that, and I was guilty of that. Let me keep my family together. All I ever wanted was our family. I don't want my family to break apart. So, that fawn response, I guess, is what was happening. And that disassociation when you knew things weren't right, but just kept staying. And for the sake of the children, for anybody who's listening who can relate to anything that Caroline is saying right now, if you're living in a disassociated existence, it is not a way to live.
It isn't a way to live. And I think just adding in on that, because I don't want anyone listening necessarily knowing they're living in that state to then start beating themselves up that they're not living. No. The number one thing that you need to make sure of before you even leave is safety. You need to know that you are safe. So even if you even now listening think you potentially may be in a narcissistic relationship, your safety of you and children, if you have them, is priority. Just start photocopying things, putting them in a box somewhere where no one else is going to find it, because today might not be the day to leave. You need to be safe, but start making preparation for when you are ready and you feel safe for you and your children. And it's so important because actually, and these are stats from here in the UK, most murders from domestic abuse happen in the first 7 days when somebody leaves an abusive relationship. It's not in the relationship, it's when they leave in that initial period. So you have to make sure that you are safe with all of this.
And that is the biggest key. That is the biggest key, because I know from a very good friend that he was a air pilot. He was a pilot, and it was a very publicly announced murder, and it was sometime after, but she then, and I won't name her name because it's still very raw, but it was all planned out, and he planned it out, but did it in a place where it was in front of the children. They witnessed it, and it was very, very, very awful. And it was not being prepared. And sometimes that fear, so we stay in that form basis because we know what it is, and it's easier to stay quiet and it's easier to stay as we are rather than having that bravery to move away. And narcissistic abuse is not necessarily physical. It is the mental aspect of it.
It absolutely is. And it's something I'm really passionate about, because you're not walking around with black eyes and broken noses, but it doesn't mean the pain doesn't run deep, the scars run deep. There are actual physiological changes that happen during narcissistic abuse in, again, that limbic system. Your amygdala increases in size, so you're on constant hyper alert, you're hypervigilant. Your hippocampus starts to shrink. The hypothalamus, you get addicted to feeling like this. It releases neuropeptides into your body, and you are addicted to feeling the way you do. And actually, some research has shown it's 20 times more difficult to break the habit of a narcissist than breaking the habit of heroin. So it's incredibly difficult. There are so many different parameters. It's not like just a normal breakup. There are so many parameters based upon how they are perceived by society in general, because again, a lot goes on behind closed doors, and we worried about, is anyone going to believe me? They're going to think I'm crazy. You are seeking that validation because remember, you're the codependent. You found yourself as this magnet to a narcissist. So your driving subconscious belief is I'm not good enough. So if you break down that relationship, and particularly when you have children, boy, that's going to shine a spotlight on not feeling good enough again. Because, oh, you're from a broken home now. Oh, you're a single mum or a single dad. So it's just highlighting and shining a spotlight on all of those deep inner wounds. So for me, healing from narcissistic abuse, time will not heal narcissistic abuse. It won't. You have to be intentional, and you have to believe you can heal. And the key for this, you have to feel you deserve to heal as well.
I think that's the key, because when you are in that relationship with the said narcissist, your self-confidence, your self-belief, your self-worth is diminished because of that's how they keep you there. Because you won't get any better. You will lose everything. It's all of those mind games that kind of play on you, and you think, okay, I'm better to be where I am, as you say, I'm better to live my life. This is my life. I'll accept it. This is how it's going to be. So, from your perspective, for anybody who's listening right now, they think, okay, so lots of this is resonating with me. I know we went a little bit graphic on what could potentially happen. That's not saying that could happen to you at all. It's just some circumstances. Because
I think it's key, Alison, to recognise that, the more we can talk about this, the more educated people become, the more we can stop this from happening. And you said before, because you're not walking around with black eyes, people don't think that there's anything wrong with you.
people don't see that you are physically at any harm. So therefore, well, actually, my mental state and my mental well-being is diminishing.
I was broken. I'd go out the front door, put my makeup on, smiley face. People would say, how are you? I'd be, oh, I'm fine. How are you?
Mm-hmm.
I was broken. I was literally a shell because I didn't know what was real, what wasn't real. I was being gaslighted. I was being told these things that now I know weren't true. And my gut was telling me they weren't true, but my husband at the time was looking me in the eye saying something different. What do? We call this cognitive dissonance. It's two opposing views and your brain needs to make a judgment of where am I going to go? What am I going to believe? And at the time, for many years, I chose to believe my ex-husband with all of that when he was literally saying all of these things. I was thinking, that doesn't seem right. That's not right. But he's my husband. Surely he wouldn't lie about something so much like that. Surely not. But yes, he did. But again, because I was in that trauma response and fawn, I'd make excuses. Oh, he's tired. He's this, So it really is. And one of the things I just want to come back to as well is, if you feel one of your friends is in a narcissistic relationship, because so often I see people who try and help someone who's in a narcissistic relationship, but they're not listening to me. Their partner's doing this, doing that. It's horrible. Remember, when you are in it, you don't see it. Mm-hmm. So be a friend that is just there for your friend when they are ready to make that move. And if they're not ready this month, next month, or even next year, doesn't mean you still can't be there. Remember, don't think they're weak. Don't think that they're bad for not leaving. They are being abused. They are doing the best that they can every single second of every single day. And knowing that you are still there for them, let me tell you, that will mean the world to them. They may not show it or act it or say thank you at that time, but I promise you just being there without judgment, listening, and, maybe you can point them towards some things, but without judgment, I promise you that will be the biggest gift you can give to your friend or family member.
I think just touching on that, I think that is so key and critical, is to be without judgment, because if they haven't walked in your shoes and that, you feel that you're going crazy, but you don't know how to get out of it, somebody else can see that, just wake up, just come on. That doesn't help. Like you said, it's almost gaslighting it, because it makes you feel worse. It makes you question it. It makes you want to fight for your marriage, your relationship, or whatever even more. And it can actually turn it the wrong way. So just not saying anything, but being that support.
Same when they come out of it. And I know, again, my family did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had.
Yes.
But I'm sure, again, I drove them crazy because 6 months later, I was still heavily embroiled with this addiction to the narcissist and everything too. And
the fight, addicted to the fight.
And they were just like, just ignore it. Just get on with life now. But like I say, there are physiological changes that have happened. And again, people don't understand that. I had complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, you wouldn't say to a soldier who'd come back from war 6 months later, oh, just get over it, get on with it.
Go to the gym, have a workout.
We don't think of trauma necessarily, of a marriage breakdown, of breaking up with somebody. We think, well, you're out of it now, you should be okay. It is not the case, because often the abuse can continue, not just by your ex-partner, but through the court system. I mean, particularly in the UK, the court system is broken. It really, really is, and these poor men and women that go through this court system continually being abused, having children taken away from them, because sadly, psychological abuse, narcissistic abuse, people don't understand it. People aren't educated on it. So again, if the narcissist is rocking up at court in a suit, and again, I'm just doing an analogy of a female and a male here. Of course, it can be the other way around. But if the male rocks up and they're looking all smart in a suit and acting a certain way, and of course the woman is there maybe without representation because they can't afford it anymore, because there might be financial abuse, and the judge is there having to make a snap decision on all of this. And it's just the system is broken because people don't understand psychological abuse, the manipulation, the showmanship.
I think from a personal perspective as well, without going into too much detail on it, that there isn't enough psychological evidence presented to a court. They are very matter of fact. What is the money? Where are the children? How many hours are you going to see them? what's the plans, and they don't take into consideration that psychological effect.
And one of the things I'm passionate about as well, in society, we actively encourage when people split up and they have children, what we call co-parenting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and everyone says, you need to co-parent, you need to get on, you need to communicate and that. No, you do not. If you've been in an abusive relationship, if you try and co-parent with the abuser, it's just another excuse for more abuse, control and manipulation. Mm-hmm. So what I teach my clients is something called parallel parenting. So again, it's both parents still with the objective of doing the best they can for the children and putting the children at the heart of this, not in the middle, but both parents disengaging from each other. Mm-hmm. And for me, we should have in this country and globally, if I'm honest, that parallel parenting is the starting point. If then you want to choose to co-parent, great. Fill your boots. Go and do that if you want to.
I think that's so important.
Someone feel bad for not co-parenting because, you know, you wouldn't expect a child who's been abused to keep going back and communicating with their abuser. It just wouldn't happen. But we expect men or women to do this all of the time. It's awful. It really is.
And it prolongs the process because there is no ability to be able to cut the ties from that. So by co-parenting, and both you and I know that from this experience, that by trying to co-parent and if the other parent isn't conforming to what you feel is right for the children, that causes even more frustration and more arguments and more unnecessary contact, which can gaslight you back into that PTSD, which is where you were triggered in the first place. So I think that's a big area that, you know, unfortunately, family courts are missing out on.
And you're right. And even I get a lot of people coming to me having seen other counsellors or therapists, psychotherapists, because what would normally work with a normal person, so to speak, actually makes it worse. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like people have come to me, almost they've been gaslighted by other therapists or counsellors because they don't understand narcissistic abuse and say, well, just talk to them, sit down and have a conversation with them. No. That will not work. You have to
when you say gaslighting for our listeners, what does that mean exactly? Because I'm trying to paint a picture for them to understand what gaslighting is without thinking about a Fast and Furious movie or something like that.
Well, gaslighting did actually come from a movie many, many years ago. There was a movie called Gaslighting, or Gaslight it was called, and it was basically almost like mind manipulation. So if you find yourself, someone saying something to you, but in your gut, it's kind of like, oh, I don't think that's true, or is it real? Or if you've got a partner that says, oh, are you wearing that tonight? You know, those almost getting you to question yourself. Am I the crazy one? You know, is it me? And again, it's such a clever and subtle manipulation. And again, in isolation, I had a client that came to me a couple of months ago and she'd written 3 sides of A4 paper of sentences that her partner was saying to her. And in isolation, if you read one, you could say, was he tired that day? Had he had a bad day at work? But looking at the 3 sides of A4 paper, it was just severe gaslighting. Everyone's going to have an off day now and again and say something, maybe you might have an argument with your partner. But all of these things were making her question herself, question her sanity. Was she the crazy one? Was there something wrong with her? You know, why was he saying that? And remember, a codependent, a person who has that lack of self, not feeling good enough, is a magnet to a narcissist. So someone who's making you question yourself, you're going to think, oh, it must be me. It must be something wrong with me. You then elicit your trauma response. You go into fawn, make excuses, or you go into freeze response, and you just numb out and dissociate with all of that too. So gaslighting is when you feel like, and again, when you're in it, you may not even recognize it, but if you're starting to question yourself on things, they're saying things to you and maybe you think it isn't true, but they're looking at you in the eye and telling you that. You know, I had my ex-husband come home from a trip once. He was cabin crew and he was 8 hours late home from a trip. And I didn't have any contact with him for about 3 of those 8 hours. And I was really worried. I actually called the police and the ambulance service to think, oh my God, has he had an accident? Because I called the airline to see is anything wrong. There's a whole chapter in my book actually about this. And then eventually when he called me, his response was, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm just in shock. I think I've killed somebody. And I was like, what? You've killed somebody? And I said, are you safe to drive? And that goes, yeah, I'll be home soon. And he literally walked in the house, he ripped his shirt off, put it in the bin, and he said, oh, there's blood on it. And as I was looking at him, he said, he then proceeded to tell me this story about this old lady who'd got off the aeroplane, she tripped, he had to do CPR, he did it wrong, and she died. So my questions were, bearing in mind, I have a medical background, and many years ago, I also worked for the airline, because that's where I met him. I was saying, well, where are the paramedics? Where were the crew? So I was asking all of these questions, and in the end, he was like, oh, stop asking me all of these things, you know? So it wasn't that he was answering the questions, he was getting cross at me for how I was asking him, but not answering those questions. So my gut was saying, hold on a second, this does not make sense. But my brain was going, this is your husband. Surely you wouldn't lie about killing somebody. Now, I know to this day, because I spoke to the airline involved, absolutely that did not happen. He completely fabricated that story. I don't know where he was. I'm sure we can all hazard a guess to where he was for 8 hours. But it was, you know, if he'd have said my battery's gone on my phone and I broke down, I'd probably been a bit more
believing.
But the extreme nature, but me knowing my husband was telling me this story,
you believed
it didn't feel right. But he was my husband. Why would he lie? Why would he lie so extreme? It must be me. I must be the crazy one in all of this. I must believe him. But it didn't feel right. But there's me questioning myself with all of this, you know. So I mean, that's an extreme example of things. There's many other things.
I have many extreme examples, but I'm not going to talk about them on here. But so how long did you said you left 10 years ago. Yes. What was it for you and for these amazing listeners who are thinking, okay, what can I do to protect myself? What can I do to protect my boundaries? If I have children, what can I do to protect them? How can we move forward into not living in a narcissistic abusive relationship anymore? What would be the top tips, and why did you decide to actually leave?
Okay, well,
so that's two questions, sorry, in one.
So it wasn't me that left. He left me. Bizarrely. I was in such a state of a trauma response. He left me. Now, initially, obviously, he told me he left me because things hadn't been great in our marriage. Since obviously it was somebody else. And I knew it was, I think, deep down anyway, because I thought there's no way he would leave and have nobody, so to speak. So he left. And then obviously I found out about all our debts and all of the things that then transpired beyond all of that.
So he left you with a lot of debt as well.
He did. And obviously some was in his name equally as well. So, you know, but as a single mum then in that debt, I was only working very, very part-time at that time because I was focused on my children. So it was scary. You know, I put £10 petrol in the car. I didn't dare put anything else in there because I didn't know whether I'd have any money. So it's a really, really tough time. I was literally living day to day with cash, really. I didn't have anything. So it was a really, really scary time in my life with these two beautiful children looking at me, relying upon me because he moved 2 hours away and was hardly seeing them. So, you know, my mum had died the year previously. And my dad, as much as I love my dad, you know, he did what he was capable of doing, so to speak. But it was really, really tough. And probably I'd say for, oh gosh, at least 2 or 3 years, I sat in victim mentality, feeling very sorry for myself. Again, I know I was in that addiction stage, the trauma response, but I was very much kind of, poor me. Why is this happening to me? You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not this. Blaming the world, looking again externally at others. You know, I need them to act like this to fix my world, so to speak. And it was only really probably in 2013. In the April 2013, I had my family home repossessed. And then in that June, I hit 40. And when I hit 40, I remember thinking, okay, Caroline. And I literally remember almost imagining I was at a fork in the road. I could either think, okay, you're 40 now, this is your life, and you're never going to have any money, and this is it. You just live your life out like this. Or the other thought was, Caroline, only you can heal yourself. Only you can do this. Nobody is going to come and rescue you. You need to rescue yourself. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, which way am I going to go? And of course, I chose the one, I'm going to self-heal. I'm going to heal myself. Wow. Thank goodness I did.
That is a big decision, because when you're stuck in that trauma state, it's very hard because you keep going on. The brain is kind of at a low point with all of your subconscious beliefs. So to actually make that decision, is one thing. I was just going to ask, how did you make that difference then?
I just knew I didn't want to live my life like that. And the reason I didn't want to live my life like that was because I wanted my children to be able to look at me and think, you know what? Bad stuff happens in life, but you can get back up again and you can create your own life. You are the driver of your life. You can create this. So I then started a business from home in the October, which very, very quickly became very, very successful. One of the sort of top 20 businesses in the United Kingdom. And I was able to pay off my debt. I was earning a six-figure income. I was able to enroll my children into private education. So and through all of that, but really working deep on myself, I realized that my true passion and purpose was I wanted to help other people through trauma, through this narcissistic abuse, because people don't understand it. It's a word, like I said at the start, bandied around, but without little understanding to that. And I wanted to make a difference.
And so what was it for you? You said you did a lot of self-healing, and a lot of people can read all the books, they can do downloads, they can watch on YouTube and so on and so forth. And even then, 10 years ago, it was still quite new. What was it that really made that pivotal change for you? What was it that you knew was the big help for you?
I think for me, it was really recognizing the reasons why I ended up in a narcissistic relationship. I stopped blaming the narcissist for my inner wounds because they were already there. He just highlighted them. So I needed to recognize, okay, you know what? I'm filled with gratitude now that I was with this narcissist who actually highlighted all of my deep inner wounds of not feeling good enough that were there already. He just shone a great big spotlight on it, that I was then able to then heal and go within. Why did I feel not good enough? And again, RTT was massively integral with all of that, even up until sort of a couple of years ago, as well, of really upgrading my subconscious beliefs about myself, really rewiring that in. I have such a great sense of awareness now about what's going on. I'm aware that if I start to get triggered by something, I had DVT a couple of months ago, which I'm still taking some medication for because of a surgery I had. And I thought, I'm getting PTSD from this. Again, even though I feel very physically and mentally strong, so to speak, I knew that this was spiraling. So I did EMDR on myself. It's an 8-step protocol. And there's a technique called the flash forward technique. So it's about something you fear. And I realized when I went through my protocol that actually what I feared was, my biggest fear was, and it was very, very visual for me, that I was in a hospital room with William and Maddie, my children, looking at me, and I was going to die. I was literally going to die in that moment. And I was looking at them thinking, oh my goodness, I'm leaving you. I'm letting you down. I'm not a good enough mother because I'm leaving you now. Because again, my ex-husband doesn't really see them very much. So I realized going through that protocol then that actually, it wasn't necessarily the PTSD from my DVT. It was actually my belief that if something happened to me, I was letting my children down. But when I went through the protocol with myself and did the bilateral stimulation, what I realized was, even if I died tomorrow, I have installed so much into my children that I'll never leave them, so to speak. I'm still with them. I've given them so much already. I know I've given my all to being the best mum that I possibly can be. So God forbid, even if I died, that, you know what, I've done enough up until that point to install in them all the wonderful stuff I hope I have for them to go on and live their best life too.
And that's so important, because I think I just want to reach on that from a personal point of view as well. But I wish I knew then what I knew now, because of the belief system that I have. And I think we all are, a little bit guilty of falling into a victim mode, but it's how quickly can we get out of that? And it's like, I know one of the lessons that I have learned from you is that parallel parenting, but also not speaking ill of the other person. Let them make their own judgments of it. Let your children decide for themselves.
Yeah, if your kids come back and they say, oh, mummy or daddy said this, you don't say, well, they shouldn't have said that or anything. All you say to your child is, well, why do you think they said that?
Yeah.
You start to educate your child on this. There's a real problem in our society now of anxiety in teenagers and our young adults. And I'm a big believer of that as parents. And I do get this because because I did do this for a while, is we so want to protect our children, and I really do understand that, but we have to allow our children to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel these things, so they know and they process and have these neural pathways, so they know how to believe with it. You don't want a 25-year-old son or daughter that you protected up until then, and then something bad happens at 25 and you're not around, and they're like, oh my goodness, how do I cope with that? You can teach them to cope now.
Yeah, I think it's so important, because otherwise we fear that they will be manipulated as well. So by stepping in all the time and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Validating your decisions, validating what you do all the time to them, is almost trying to protect them from being almost manipulated, but you can only do what you can do. And when you're in that calmer state, if you're in a traumatized state, you don't know how to not do that. Yeah. So by working through the RTT and through working through the EMDR, it's such a valuable tool. And like I said, I wish I'd had this 10 years ago, because it would have made such a difference. And I remember saying to my son 2 years ago that I'm so sorry for everything you've experienced, and thank goodness. And whether it was a facade or whether it's real, we never really know, because they always try to protect you as well as a parent. And I remember him saying to me, Mum, it's okay, it's made me who I am today.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. And funny enough, I said to my husband now, because I'm remarried, only this morning, I was just looking at Will and Maddie as they were coming up and down the stairs, just getting ready for school. And I just said, oh, I'm so proud of them. Do you know what? I feel like my children are the most happy, well-balanced children I know. And I do feel like that. I genuinely feel like that. And, just because their father doesn't see them really more than 12 hours a month, they absolutely do not think that their father doesn't do that because they're not good enough. Yeah. Because they understand behavior. And that didn't happen immediately, because they were very young when this happened. It's been a gradual over time of me gently asking questions. So they love their dad, they see him and they have a good relationship with him. They absolutely do. But they recognize that all the things he said they'll do and then they don't do, they don't take that personally, that he's not doing that because they're not good enough. They get why he is based on his childhood and his past experiences. And that is key. So when they're at school and people are behaving in a certain way, my children understand it's nothing to do with them. It's not a reflection on them that why someone might be mean to them. It's just you may have triggered something in them and they are projecting onto you all of their past experiences as well. It's nothing to do with you.
True.
And they know this now. They know this at 11 and 15. I was in my 30s before I knew this.
Yeah, but, thank goodness that they had you there to not protect them. Protection is the wrong word. It's to educate them, to allow them to have emotional well-being, allowing them to have mental well-being, and also giving them the stability which you feared you wouldn't be able to at that turning point, that fork in the road, £10 of petrol or £10 in food. Which one do I go for? It's that real.
And I remember, both my children are at the same school, and my son is now the head boy of this school, from being this shy, unconfident boy to the head boy. My daughter's the scholar at the school, captain of her netball team. They are both incredible children, thriving at life, getting life with high ambition of where they want to go, but understanding that happiness is key to all of this as well. And they know that they're in their driving seat of their life, and they have boundaries. That was one thing I didn't have, boundaries. Because again, as someone coming from that lack of self-worth, my boundaries were very blurred, because I wanted you to act a certain way, so I'll be like this, because then if you're really nice to me, it must mean I'm good enough then, because I'm always looking externally for everyone else to make me feel worthy.
It's about that validation, isn't it?
It is. The biggest gift you can give to your children is to heal yourself, to know your worth. If you do that, oh my goodness, you will break that cycle. You will break that cycle, and you will gift your children the gift of their own self-worth to go and live their best life with healthy boundaries.
Yeah, it's so important, because it's a mental, emotional and physical state of being. We talk about well-being, but it's also about being well. And being well, as we said, with the PTSD, it's not always necessarily, you can't see it. It isn't always necessarily visually physically impairing, but mentally it can start. And this is where you and I kind of go off on sciencey tangents, that trauma is not just about the brain is the physical, and then it causes other illnesses if we don't heal it and don't treat it and don't catch it. Because if you're in a state of trauma and then it comes into depression, and the depression comes into further illnesses, and we're not healing, a drug, as much as, you know, medicine and prescriptions are great for certain traumas, what it doesn't do is heal the root trigger and cause.
Well, medicine was always brought about initially for immediate trauma, as in, you know, if your leg got cut,
surgery,
things like this. Whereas it's just kind of become the norm and everything, you know. And sadly, it's money and lack of time for doctors and stuff, because it's easier to give someone a tablet, so to speak, for depression than think, well, why are you depressed? Let's find that root cause, because then, you know what, you can live a life without depression as opposed to a life with depression, taking medication. And again, like you say, you know, I have a medical background, so I'm a big advocate for conventional medicine in the right place, but it's really important that we try and understand those reasons why someone is feeling like that in the first place, because 80%, and I believe it's more than that, but that's kind of what the research is saying at the moment, 80% of disease is caused by stress. Well, if we can...
it was actually increased to 400%. 400% of employees in the USA over the last 5 years have either been diagnosed with depression or some form of cardiovascular illness or stroke due to stress.
Correct. And
400%.
Correct. And it's our nervous system being in dysregulation. So, you know, some of your listeners, and again, I'll catch you while you're listening. Are you listening with your shoulders raised? Are you clenching your fist? Are you picking at your skin? Are you breathing just in the upper part of your chest? You know, all of these things, biting your nails, all of these things, you know, these are potential trauma responses. And we don't even realize we're doing it half of the time because it becomes very, very habitual. That's stored trauma in your body. We should have our shoulders down. We should be breathing right into the depths of our stomach and calming our nervous system. When our nervous system is in dysregulation, it means that we have got some kind of trauma response going on in the body, and we need to learn to regulate ourselves, especially if as a child we were never taught how to self-regulate or self-soothe. People, again, parents might step in, or you were just told to get on with it. Whereas as adults, so a lot of the work with the EMDR before we get to the processing aspect of it is I give people a lot of self-regulation tools so that in that moment when you go, I call it offline, into that emotional part of your brain and everything's like, and you're all emotional, it's tools to get you back online into that prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain, so that you are able to think logically and rationally again. You know you're in the present, you are safe right now, because when your nervous system is dysregulated, it's on alert, and it's on alert because of either the past and it's taking you back to certain times, and it's somatic memory, stored trauma, or you're fearful about something that potentially may or may not happen in the future. Highly likely it won't, but you're worried about it as well.
So let's kind of move it on a bit, because I know that our listeners, if they're listening, then they've been listening for a while, and we could get really sciencey, but then it might just get a little bit too complex when we're talking about the SNS, the PNS and everything else. But if any of the listeners now are really thinking and resonating with where they are, whether they feel that they're in trauma or whether they feel that, gosh, that sounds really familiar, I'm not going crazy, it's not me, there is something I can do about it, I don't have to live my life this way forever and a day for the sake of, then what would be your, because obviously you have now made your £70,000 of debt, cleared that, and now making a hugely successful business, and not just from the point of being successful, but helping others succeed as well, which is the biggest part of what you said you wanted to do within this journey. What is the greatest tool you could impart on our listeners to help them right now where they're at?
To keep being in the present moment. For me, if you can stay present as much as you can and just engage all 5 of your senses even by doing that, because when you engage your 5 senses, you bring yourself back into that front part of the brain.
So share with the listeners what those 5 senses really are.
So that could be go and eat a piece of chocolate, for instance, because by nature of focusing and mindful eating on that, you are having to move yourself from your emotional part of your brain back into the front part. Maybe go and smell something really, really nice that maybe evokes some memories for you or something like that, because again, focusing focusing on that, you're pushing yourself back into that front part of the brain. Go and touch something, you know, whatever it is. I teach a lot of my clients what we call a comfort box, where they get a box and they have to put 5 things in there that are all about your 5 senses. So in my comfort box, I have a photograph of my mum and my children. So that's the sight, because even now, as I'm telling you about it, I'm smiling. So again, focusing on that brings you back into that front part of the brain. I have a really lovely black stone from when I went to Mexico, and it holds a lot of happy memories for me. It's very smooth. It's lovely to touch as well. I have a post-it note with a playlist that I have in my phone. And again, I apologize to your listeners, but I'm a real 80s chick and 90s dance music. I love that. It really, really engages my mood. And then also, so we've got sight, sound, we've got touch. So smell, I have a really nice candle, my own candle range that I have, which is lime, basil and mandarin in there as well. And then the final scent in there is I have a little bit of chocolate. So again, I can eat a little bit of chocolate for the taste. When you engage your 5 senses, you are moving and pushing your brain into that prefrontal cortex. You cannot focus on those 5 senses when you are emotional. It's physically impossible. You can only do that in the front part of your brain, the logical part. So just by doing certain exercises, and that's just one of them, there's many that I teach my clients as well, to self-regulate, to bring yourself back online, to know that, you know what, yes, this isn't a nice situation I might be in, but I'm safe, I'm okay, I'm in the present now. I'm not in that traumatic marriage, relationship, event, car crash, whatever.
But what if they are? What if they're still in that marriage right now? What if they still are in that relationship?
So again, if they're in that relationship right now, for me, it's safety. It's safety and creating a system of people potentially when you want to go. It's reaching out and preparing before you go. But safety is your priority. Don't even think about healing at that stage, because it's not going to happen when you're in the relationship. The priority is safety and creating a safe exit strategy. I work with a number of clients who are still in their relationship, and we work together creating an exit strategy for them safely.
I think as well, for a lot of people, listeners, they get scared from the financial constraints. And again, I'll stay because this is safe, this is what I have. But, you know, not necessarily if you have to set a buffer account, but know that when you need to go, you can go, and everything will work out for the best. Even if you are £70,000 in debt, you can turn it around. If you believe it to be true and you believe that your life will be and can be better, then that's that fork in the road that you really can make a difference.
I call it a narcissist-free ecosystem. So you surround yourself with relevant people that, because for the first year anyway, it's going to be tough. Any divorce, any breakup, you've got children or anything, it's going to be tough anyway. So you need good people around you, not people that are going to gossip, not people that are going to perpetuate the problem or judge or anything like that. You want good people around you who are just going to support you. That's what you need. And when you do that and you photocopy everything, you get everything in place, you maybe go and speak to local advice bureaus. A lot of lawyers will do a free call where you can speak to them potentially as well. So just get all your ducks in a row before you leave. Make sure you are safe though. That is priority.
Yeah, so important, so important. And Caroline, now that you've brought all of these modalities together and you have, say the name of it again, your license in it?
Yeah, so I've put it all together to call it neuro freedom healing, because it's about neuro is the nervous system, the brain, freedom is about, I want everyone to live a free life, and the healing aspect of that. And I've chosen, for me, the best modalities. I've been trained by the best people in the world. Marissa Peer, who trained me personally in rapid transformational therapy, just the most incredible therapist with so many years of experience.
And we forgot to say that you're actually also a high performance coach trained by another very successful high performance coach, Brendan Bouchard, who is amazing.
Because for me, it's about my clients. And you know what? If I want to give my best, I need to learn from the best. And that's what I need to do. I've invested a huge amount in my academia to help my clients, because I believe that if I feel there's a gap in what I'm doing for my clients, or I feel they need something else, I will go and source that. I'll think, well, okay, what can I do? How can I help them to the best of my ability? Because I want them to live the life I now live, free of all of this, and that's not to say other stuff isn't going to happen in your life. It will, just like I had my DVT. But
it's about being more prepared, isn't it? It's about being more mindful. And you caught yourself very quickly knowing and feeling what you felt. So how can I turn that around, and what can I do to heal it now, as opposed to living with that for another 6, 12, 18 months or whatever? So, I think it's so, so important. And what you do, I wish I had 10 years ago. But what you do now, I'm so grateful that you have available for those who are listening, for your audience, for the people who work with you, your amazing following on YouTube, your amazing following in your memberships, that really does help people to heal and to know that they are not crazy, to know that it is not them, to know that they do not need to seek external validation, but they have to find that self-confidence, self-worth and self-belief within themselves too. So what is the one kind of top nugget that was your daily go-to when you knew that you needed to make the change? What was it you did every single day without fail to get you to where you are today?
I just started to gratitude journal, actually, because very often we're looking at the world through this grey lens, and we miss that actually, even in the midst of all of this, we still have some good stuff going on as well, however tiny that is. And it's it's just having again that awareness of, yes, it's a bad time. Yes, it is this, but it is only for now. It can change. It's a process. And yes, it might feel like you're walking in treacle right now, but
I love that, walking in treacle. I don't love it, but I know exactly what you mean.
But every little step, these little teeny tiny steps over a day, a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, leads to a giant leap. And then all of a sudden you've gone through a weekend without crying. And then we celebrate that.
Or a weekend without responding.
Correct, absolutely.
Which is huge for your emotional strength and your physicality as well. So Caroline, I really am so grateful. And listeners, if you want to get hold of Caroline, she, as I said, she has an amazing community of being on YouTube, on Instagram, on your Facebook. So we will drop the links in the comments below, and you can get hold of Caroline that way. And I'm so happy that, you have literally transformed your life. You do have a book as well.
Yeah, it's called Became My Superpower, and it's available on Amazon.
Okay, amazing. And Neurofreedom Healing is your new name for what you do, bring everything together.
A collective name for what I believe are the best modalities in the world, in my opinion.
It's amazing. And I'm so grateful that you are where you are at and you are healing continuously. And I think that's an important thing, is to know that we are always healing. Like we're always learning.
Learning, not a destination. Life is learning.
There's no judgment from it. So Caroline, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing. And I hope, listeners, if you have got even just 1 ounce of a golden nugget from this conversation that we've had today, that you go away with that, you think about it, you learn from it, and you're able to find some form of healing within yourself. So please do tune in. If you know that there's somebody out there who could really do with listening to this podcast right now, could resonate and help them, then please do share it. So we will see you on the next episode. So I want to say a huge thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast. I really am so grateful for all of you. We are so grateful for all of you that are tuning in, and that if you feel that you have got value from this podcast, if you feel that there's so much more that you want to hear, then please do go over to iTunes, leave a review, and share this episode with some of your best friends or people you know would also really, really get value from it. We only grow through you, and we're only here because of you. We want you to know that each and every woman out there, we are supporting you, we have your back, and we really want to bring you as much value as possible. So from all of us here at Vibrant Balanced Health, we want to say thank you so much for listening to us today. Your honesty is so important, and we really, really just want to help more and more women live their more vibrant life and create impact. And that only happens with your support and with your connection to share this message with thousands of women. So thank you so much for stopping in. And if you feel called to, please do pop on over, leave a review, say hi, leave your comments, let us know what you'd like to hear more of, and we will be sure to bring you even more value over and over again.